Okay, so I'd like to welcome you all. My name is Oliver Schulze. I am a visiting professor at Washington University in St. Louis and a partner at Schulze plus Grasso in Copenhagen, which is where I'm speaking to you from. So we would love to welcome you. We have been working with students of the Master in Urban Design program for a good week now, and we would like to share with you the work that we've done. So the class that we run was called Life on the Loop, the Master in Urban Design Corona Diaries. So we have been trying to make sense of public life and public space during this particular time, which is very different from when we normally run these workshops in the spring break. So just to let you know, this schedule is normally in the spring break. All the students are with me in Europe for 1 week, and we descend on one city that we choose, and we investigate public life and how you can read life in cities to inform the design of cities and the design of public spaces. We were stopped in our tracks with 1 week to go this time. But nevertheless, now we're running the workshop from Copenhagen in St. Louis, and we'd love to share you what we've done. So I will share my screen with you. So, good. Okay, so by ways of introduction, Schulze plus Grasso, I will introduce to you what our practice does in urban design. Then we'll briefly talk about the Lively City Studio in 2020 and what we've worked on this week. Then we will have students presenting tactical urbanism proposals for an important street in St. Louis called Delmar in the Loop. And then we have an amazing panel gathered that I think are just still calling in and getting assembled, that will be listening to the presentations and giving you feedback. And we look forward to discussing our very particular condition that we are in right now and what it means for the city of the future. But let me get started. I want to swiftly move through our introduction so that we can look at what the students have done and that I can introduce the panel when they're all assembled. So who are we? Schulze plus Grasso is a group of thinkers united by a passionate belief in the power of knowledge-based urban design to tackle the biggest challenges of our time. We're an adaptable and ambitious studio. We're dynamic and sociable, and our studio draws on the diverse talents, backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives of our team to advocate for and design transformative public space at every scale. And we dream about our work. So that's who we are. And I always love this spring break and the studio in St. Louis because it gives me a chance to connect with the university to build on our relationship. So thanks to WashU for now, this is, I think, the 9th year. I think next year is the big anniversary, the 10th year that we'll be running this workshop. So next time, hopefully in person again, celebrating in St. Louis. Now, Schulze plus Grasso, as I said, works a lot with public spaces, with city development. And to do that in a good way, we believe we need to build a footprint of practice that covers urban design, architecture, landscape architecture, mobility planning, and urban research. And we employ people in all of those disciplines. However, we also believe in the power of small and medium-sized businesses. So we are a hit squad of 12 of the most talented urban thinkers in Scandinavia, whilst good half of us, or the majority even, didn't grow up here. So we are actually a depository of a lot of influences from around the world. And despite our limited size, we have a very international outlook. We're very passionate about streets. We think that streets are the evolution lines of our city. We think it is around the street that we reinvent our city every day. Every day we wake up and the city is different. The city is never static. And we can see it now on Del Mar in the Loop and on other cities in the United States. It's in streets that we reimagine our society, and we also push forward our shared understanding of what our urban societies are. That can look rather complex. Louise and I have been working for years, also for the municipality of Copenhagen, and for them we have developed public space parameters. So to try and help people decode the complexity of public spaces and streets, we have embodied a lot of public space research into public space parameters that help people to analyze public spaces when they enter them, to think about how they could be reorganized and refurbished if they are existing, or to plan and design them if they're new. So we develop public space parameters based on knowledge, and that knowledge feeds into the transformation of the city. And our class, they use this framework that you see in front of you as the starting point of their investigations. You'll hear more of all of these public space parameters in the presentations. Our firm works across the globe, or at least you could say from the west coast of the United States. Louise, for example, has recently worked in Seattle, in the Capitol Hill area. That's in the media a lot at the moment. But in St. Louis we've worked. We've worked on the East Coast. We have worked a lot in Europe, of course, that's on our doorstep. But with Mohammed, we've also worked in Saudi Arabia. Louise and I have worked in Amman, in Oman, and a little bit further north, we've come as far as Moscow. We've not ventured further east yet. The types of projects that we love are, this project, for example, is on site at the moment. The design district in London is under construction. It's on the Greenwich Peninsula. It's a development of 16 purpose-built buildings for the creative sector. And our firm is responsible for the design of all the open spaces, all the squares, all the co-working yards, all the lanes, and all the streets. A scale up in Berlin, we're working on Potsdamer Platz, where we are helping Brookfield to reimagine what 450,000 square feet of public space should look like in the most important historic destination in central Berlin. So that's on the drawing boards right now. We have been working for the Technical University of Denmark, helping them to develop a development plan for 2050, how they can quadruple space for teaching and research. And that's well underway. Louise, who you will hear later, has been working intensely with the university to develop the plan and is now implementing that. And closer to your home, we have also been working with Jamie, who I hope is on the call now, with Jamie Kolker, the university architect, and the administration of the university to help you re-envisage the east end of the campus that we have seen and we hope to see alive soon again. And we've also been helping your university to create a better environment for walking and cycling on campus and near campus. So let's talk about what we're here for. We are here to show you what the Lively City Studio at WashU, the Master of Urban Design program, does. We believe that if you want to design public spaces, the first thing you need to do is you need to generate an understanding of what happens in public space. So we've developed over many years now a whole range of techniques, some being old school based on observation, some using things like GPS tracking and drone photography and algorithms to process information. All of those techniques we deploy to generate data and evidence that we base design on. And again, the Lively City Studio at WashU, we've done that from LA with Mohammed, who you will also meet, to St. Louis. We've done it in London, Berlin, Rotterdam, and Copenhagen. So that's a decade's worth of thinking about public space. Now, public space in Copenhagen today, or at least until 3-4 months ago, was this thing that you need if you want to build a modern metropolis where people can live closer together, dense cities, compact cities where people can walk and cycle and generally behave and get close to one another. And that sort of is all under pressure also in Copenhagen. And that is the subject of what we want to talk about today. So the students are in St. Louis, and St. Louis, like Copenhagen, for the last 4 months has seen an emptying out of the public space. So the life has sort of drawn away from public space as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The lockdown in Copenhagen is slightly unraveling again, and the city is much more alive already. But in St. Louis, we followed in the media, like in many cities throughout the United States. We could see that in response to the murder of George Floyd, whilst in police custody, we could see that people were flooding back into the streets to demonstrate, and to really put attention to the urgency of public voice in the development of cities and society. So our students have been looking at that, and now this puts a new context to what the Lively City Studio needs to look at this year. So we could not just run a standard studio, so we have to respond to the situation. If there's somebody who should take a stand on it, then I think we do need to try and understand it. So we have. So we've looked at Delmar in the Loop. Everybody in St. Louis knows it, everybody who has been to Wash U. It's basically a street that is close to the university. It's an important lifeline in the city with a lot of entertainment and retail or food and hotels. So it is a lifeline and a communication line in St. Louis. And you can see images here. Right now, lots of the shops are boarded up, and actually quite a high percentage of ground floor units is boarded up. But you can still, the businesses behind the screens, they are still operating. So the students will show you in a second work that they've done. We've given them the task to go out onto Delmar in the Loop, to do a stress assessment walk, to figure out how they themselves react to being in public space under the pandemic, under the lockdown, and to register their reaction, and then to work with that evidence and try and feed that into some interventions as urban designers that would help other users of this space right now to be less anxious in public space. And maybe we can learn things that are actually valuable for the long term. So the students have been looking at that. So to do that, we've made COVID-19 compliant scale rulers. Jonathan Stittleman was so kind to prepare these with colleagues in St. Louis. Every student was armed with a 6-foot scale ruler so they could investigate Delmar in the Loop and actually, look at how are they responding to the spaces and how are these spaces constructed and how big are they, etc. So the stress assessment walking assignment, we want to show you some results, but basically it meant the students had to go out on site and they had to record their own reaction and generate maps of where are stress hotspots, where they feel stressed, and where's the opposite, where they feel little stress. And that's generated some fabulous maps of Delmar in the Loop, where we could identify clearly where there was a reaction that is very different. So today we react completely different under COVID-19. Under COVID-19, things are negative that in a normal urban situation would be positive. So it's quite a complex situation. I also want to share with you that the studio started out with looking at how have cities and countries throughout the world reacted to COVID-19. So the students all started out on Monday with looking at how have cities from China, where many of the students are from, to Taiwan, to Rwanda, to Kenya, to Europe, Amsterdam, Berlin, to Vancouver and North America. So they've looked at how have cities throughout the world reacted, creating particular new urban infrastructure to deal with being in space together under COVID-19. So now we will hand over to the students. The students have worked in 4 groups and they're now going to present in this order. We're going to show you 4 takes on what could be done on Del Mar in the Loop on Monday with pretty tight budgets to really reduce the anxiety experienced by people today. And not just that, the students will show you how that can be an important lesson for how Del Mar in the Loop could be a much better street in the future after the epidemic. So we will lay out with trolley islands. We're going to look at waiting lines on Del Mar in the Loop. We're going to look at urban tapestry. And we're going to look at roadside walk, work, and play. I'm going to hand over now to Dongzi Tao as the first presenter. And I invite our wonderful panelists to also contribute to the discussion after the presentation. And to do that, I will just stop sharing my screen so I can see Jamie's on the call. So I'd like to welcome our panelists, Jamie Kolker, the University Architect of Washington University in St. Louis. I can see Linda Samuels from Washington University in St. Louis. Linda, we look forward to hearing from you. On my screen, top left corner is Louise Grasso, my business partner. Louise, thanks for joining. We've got Jenny Rowe. Jenny, where are you? Ah, Jenny, top center. There we go. Great. Jenny, nice to see you. And I also want to show Mohammed Al-Mahmoud is right next to Jenny, at least on my screen. And Irene, compadre. Ah, left. Irene. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all our panelists, for taking time out. We very much look forward to your opinions. And we look forward to you panelists to look at the work of the students, but not just to comment on that. I'm looking to you as panelists. You've been picked because I think you can inject thinking into perspective. I would like us to think what we hear now from the students and what we've learned about public space under the pandemic and also under the demonstrations that happened after or now. Is this going to change our way of looking at the city? Are we going to stop looking at cities as dense and compact cities that are climate proof, that help us to be a more sustainable world? Is that under threat now? And are we going to start design different types of public spaces? That's a discussion I want to have. Can we use this situation now to learn something to get better at building sustainable cities? Or are we under threat here? Yeah. But I would like to hand over now to Dongzi. Where are you?
Hello.
Here we go. So I don't know if I need to share my screen. No, all panelists can share. So you can take it away, Dongzi. Okay. Please show us your work.
Can you see this? Okay. So my name is Dongzhe. My group team member is Josiah, Liang, Jing, Wenjie, and me. So we identified the overlapping usage of public space is the source of stress on the loop during COVID-19. So here we're proposing recycling the abandoned trolley to give more space for public activities. To start from, we looked at the stress data and identified 2 stress hotspots as circled on drawing. We looked at pedestrian data and we collected a large amount of traffic passing by the area. So we were wondering, what if we can better reorganize the traffic flow in a way that reduces stress and over-intimate social encounters? And then we started to look at trolley lines because this is not used during the pandemic. And it takes a lot of public space, but have a clear organization structure. So this thing has its potential. On the other hand, we also look at these existing conditions on the loop that is either needed to be better facilitated or could be better used including those plywood panels and alternative mobility options. So just looking at one block ahead on Forsyth Boulevard, we found it a good idea to just slow down the traffic on the loop, excuse me, by having a shared road by both cars and bikes. And far in Europe, they had a really nice precedent by having this platform on the sidewalk taking over the street as an extension of the restaurant. So given all these problems and infrastructural opportunities, how can this trolley be recycled to reorganize our spaces? So our two hotspots become our pilot sites, either with existing trolley platform or the potential for a temporary platform to be added. And overall, we are transforming trolley tracks into bike lanes that occasionally cut into car lanes. So the first site is at Salt and Smoke, as shown on the drawing. So this place requires large amount of on-site dining furniture. So we push them off from the sidewalk and between the sidewalk and track lanes. So in this way, pedestrians can have more spaces to walk and people can also have a more private dining experience. We also used planters as dividers for a more pleasant dining space. And at the center of this drawing, you can see an elevated platform is added there to level the area and the sidewalk. So making sure it is easier for servers to come in and out of from the restaurant. Panels are another option we provided for organizing the space. They have the same function as planters, but they have more potential in terms of art expression. So we especially paid attention to the way how we can slow down traffic and safety of bikers. We propose to fill up the inner trolley tracks so that they can be flat, they can be safe for bikers. And on the other hand, we are adding a 1 to 2 inch high, a small bumper to the outer tracks. So when the lanes start to merge, drivers will be able to sense the change because they're driving onto the bumpers. So they know the lanes are merged. There will be bikers behind or after them. So color coding the bike lane is another way how we emphasize the shared road idea. Also, by coloring the road, we think it also makes the environment more pleasant and vibrantly welcoming. And this is our second site. It's at Bleak and the entrance of the Loft building. So this thing different from the first one, it requires extra public space for social interaction and artistic activities. So in this drawing, we showed how public furniture and trolley platforms can highlight the moment of social interaction and also accommodate creative activities. So in this segment, you can see different from the other one, bike lanes and car lanes separate into two just naturally. So bikers are closer to the platform and artists are showing their works and their public furnitures on the platform for anyone who wants to use them. And this is another rendering showing the vibrant moment we captured on the trolley platforms. So to sum up, in this way, we recycle the trolley infrastructure by reinventing all of its key three components into public space configures, and also an option as flexible mobility possibility. So all of this together facilitates the reorganization of public spaces. So finally, some takeaways from our design. We think streets are the skeleton of urban space. It takes a lot of volume of public space, but it can also be flexible during these pandemic times. So if the whole street can work together, can shape its place and location, there will be more space for everybody, for business, for people who are walking, for people who are biking, and for people who want a safer social distancing during this pandemic. Thank you. Oliver, you are muted.
Here we go. You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes, so thank you very much, Dongji, for this presentation. I would like to very much invite our panelists. This is the first chance you get to ask questions for clarification. I would just like to qualify the students have worked on this since Monday. So all the evidence gathering they've done was done on Wednesday in a survey they designed on Tuesday after doing precedent research on Monday. yesterday they worked hard to pull together this presentation in a 24-hour marathon. So you should judge it by that. It was a from the hip kind of exercise. So, but please do ask questions for clarification, or any comments are welcome. We would love to take a few minutes after each student presentation to hear from you.
I have some thoughts. I can throw some questions out there to get started.
Please do.
Hi, Dongjia. Hi, team.
Hi.
Good to see you all. Very fast work. Good job. But some of my questions have to do with the challenge that Oliver has posed at this particular moment in time and at this particular place. So what I'm observing in your proposal is that they reference parklets and other kind of moves that are happening in cities that where the road has been being given back to public space from car space for the last couple years. And I think you would be providing a certain amount of distance for people to be able to sit 6 feet apart and have sort of spatial protection. But how are you actually looking at this? One, because Del Mar is a very different street. And for those who aren't familiar with St. Louis, it's incredibly racially charged, right? It's a street that kind of divides the city into kind of a wealthier section and a less wealthy section, a white section and a black section. But also it's, you know, and it's a really important moment to be thinking about that. And I don't know if that was part of the conversation you were having. So this particular moment in terms of COVID and this particular moment in terms of Del Mar and St. Louis, can you talk about how that changed the way you thought about this space?
I think one way we're thinking about this, I'll jump to one of the prior slides we have. So if you look at the bottom left corner, these are panels people use during the demonstration. That's a new element just come out during this pandemic. So our team figured out it could be a potential that leave there forever. So those panels they're of course multifunctional. They protect the glass, but more importantly, they bear doodles on them. So they're a strong way to show your expressions, to show your political positions, and to show your idea about the communities. So we think this thing so combine this idea with the other drawing I have on the right side and an implied corridor that's organized a sidewalk in a different way. We think this new element just came out can be something that preserves on the site forever, which on the other hand, the message which carries can change over time. Either can be racial, can be this pandemic focused. It just gives people more space to freely express their idea on this very important street.
If I can chip in with something, Linda, I think I looked at the data that was coming from the students in their stress assessment survey. And for me, pretty outstanding was that many of the locations where they registered the highest levels of stress were actually areas where buildings were boarded up. So there were not necessarily changes or consequences of COVID-19, but they were actually consequences of demonstrations and preparing for demonstrations that they yielded pretty high stress ratings. Just they said that the presence of boarded up windows on a building that's back of sidewalk, that sort of triggered them to register their highest stress ratings. So we're still knee deep in this to try and understand, pick apart, where does the stress actually come from? And now we have these overlapping issues that are not so easy to kind of work through in this very, very compact week that we've had. But that's one reading that we did have, that both of those events, or both of the spatial consequences of those activities, they reinforce each other in not a positive way.
Well, and I appreciate that idea of amplifying the canvas that you're talking about, that's what needs to happen, is more space for voices, not less.
Yeah, and also something like Oliver said, people feel really stressed when windows are boarded up. But on the other hand, compared with blank boards, boards with drawings actually can make you a little bit relaxed. So in this way, we propose our panels to be flexible so that it works as a door. You can open it to show the big glass windows. Also organize the space at the same time, but you can also close it. So it's a flexible installation.
So the role of art was actually something that several of them picked in on. So you'll see in some of the other presentations as well that murals and graphic art on vertical surfaces, I think is in all of the proposals more or less. So I think this idea of messaging and expression is one that is sort of picked up intuitively by all of the students, not necessarily putting words to it concretely yet, but it's definitely something that is registering and that they have registered.
Oliver, can I add something?
Sure.
Linda, I think something else that we were thinking about, Dongja, can you go to the platforms in front of Blick? A lot, like all of the seating and dining areas on Del Mar you have to pay for them, like you need to be buying food from somewhere. So we thought that these platforms, since they're not really in front of a dedicated restaurant, they could be just like public picnic areas. So that way there's not like a division of you have to have money in order to be, to have a place on the street.
Josiah, I'm glad you brought that point up because a question of mine that for your group, for one high group, so this is the end. We had you at the very beginning of your time in the MUD program, and now we're seeing you at the end. So this is really a treat. But a question I had is, ultimately when I saw the presentation, I felt that it was kind of a safe proposal, you know, like it seems like some of the assumptions of what Del Mar is, it's a commercial district. You're still going to have Blick, you're still going to have restaurants, you're still going to have vehicular traffic. It feels a little bit safe that it looked like these bump outs are additional seating. It didn't look like it was kind of radically changing the nature of the commercial corridor so some of my question is, did you entertain more radical notions, like completely flipping the circulation or options for mobility? And did you is this a compromise or kind of a middle ground? Was there something more radical? And then a second kind of related question is when you were thinking about comfort along Del Mar, and you're registering where you felt uncomfortable, and it seems like the places that your class felt a high level of discomfort or boarded up windows, does that come from your perception of you're afraid of I guess I want to hear a little bit about your bias. Or I know a lot of what's happening right now with protests, people are starting to confront their own bias, and I think of the experience of seeing a boarded up window and thinking, oh, this makes me uncomfortable for reasons X, Y, and Z. I think of the empathy of like, my God, a person of color in this public space, their level of discomfort has nothing to do with the boarded up windows. It has to do with, are they going to make it home, that day? So I wonder a little bit about conversations about kind of your own perspectives on public space in this wider issue of other communities. And so level of radicalness and empathy. 2 questions.
Okay, I can start, and Dongja, if you want to add, or anyone else, please do. But for the radical, I think that what we thought was radical was taking over the street, taking over the lanes in the trolley path for the bikes. We talked about that for a long time, about like, well, can we just like put them in the same place as the cars? Can we reduce all the car things to just two lanes? And then the other things, I think you're right, they just seemed like they made sense. Like, oh, why aren't we using the trolley platforms for public space? So maybe those were less radical because they just seem to make sense. And then for the stress tests, yeah, I noticed just a lot of different responses, even among just the students who were doing it. Like, I think some of the high stress points were when you were walking in between like a crowded dining area and there were lots of people around, or when you were coming up on like a lone dining area in the middle of just lots of empty sidewalk, and because it just seemed awkward that there was like one table there. And then the boarded up facades, when they were painted and they had like messages on them, it wasn't a sense, it didn't add stress to me unless I like stopped to read if it had like a more serious message, and then I felt like stress about the situation. And then if it didn't have any paint on it, then it was also a cause of stress because it didn't feel like, it didn't seem like it was being used positively. It just felt like sort of a disaster response.
I think also, a focus also in the projects was to identify things that could be done on Monday, that could be finished next Friday. So there was also this attempt to come up with fairly pragmatic approaches to working with existing infrastructure and what you can do with a few sacks of cement, and what you find. So, but point taken, they are very well behaved. That's very true. That's very true.
Well, with a bag of cement, you could put up a barrier and prevent any cars from entering the Delmar Loop. We could do that tomorrow.
Yeah.
We might end up in jail the day after.
Can I ask a logistical question based on Renee's second comment, which I think is great? And this is just because I'm not super familiar with the process. When you say you were doing a stress test, Josiah, it sounds like you were gauging your own stress. You weren't imagining that you were someone else on this street. So why does your stress matter? Why are you the key player? Each of you. How do you think the public?
I think we are all key players. So that's why we need so many of us go onto the street rather than one or two. So this is done by 10 students, like half of the studio, because the other half has to stay at home. So we use the maximum of people we can use to go on the street. So different, as Josiah said, different people are using different standards. Some people are putting themselves into other people's boots to take that sense. And some people just using their intuition. And some people like Leon, he set a really specific urban designer voting chart or something like that.
I would like to invite Jenny as well. Jenny is a professor at UVA in Charlottesville, and her research is a lot about well-being and urban design and how people feel comfortable or not comfortable in urban environments. And Jenny would like to make a contribution.
So thank you. Terrific work in such a short space of time. Commend you for that. And your graphics are super clear. So a couple of things about stress. To answer Linda's comment, they only had a very short space of time to gauge or do any sort of stress assessment. I mean, what you would do in an ideal world is you would, of course, do that stress assessment in a wider population across all ages, all ethnicities, and that would take time. And there are different ways of doing it other than just self-report. But I think to measure your own stress was a good starting point, and it was very revealing. You said, the things that stressed you were boarded buildings, claustrophobic areas, but also empty spaces. And that completely resonates with the theory about stress in urban environments that we know. So we know that environments that are engaging and offer fascination and a sense of curiosity will bring down people's stress levels. And you're doing that by your ideas for dividers and public art and dealing with those kind of empty facades. I think if I had one comment for you, and it kind of does reflect what Linda was saying, I think you need to think a little bit more about this space from the perspective of 8 to 80. There's a wonderful website, 8 to 80. It's a Toronto-based organization. And if you design for the 8-year-old and the 80-year-old, you are really designing an inclusive environment for everybody. So I would love to see you think a little bit more about play, because we know children under COVID are massively losing out on play opportunities and the chance to integrate with other children. We know that older people are massively isolated because they are the people who are having to shield the most. So that's what I'd say. If you had a little bit more time to think about it, think about fascination and how you can build that in. One way is with public art, but the other way is with plant material, and you could be quite inventive about how you use that plant material on the facades, on the streets, and think about your demographic. Oh, and also I had one other comment, and it was about nighttime use. And I know that you've done a massive amount of work in a few short days, but this is, you know, presumably a street that's used 24/7 throughout the week and 24 hours. But otherwise, I think it's a great job.
Thanks, Jenny. So that was great feedback. I'd like us to move on to the next presentation. We've got 4 in all. So Khalid Al-Yohan.
Can I have 3 minutes?
Sure.
Am I allowed to? I'm worried about the time, but is that?
You are.
Okay, thank you. Just one thing that I wanted to just throw another. This is an unbelievably complicated moment for sure, but the other moment that you've chosen to comment on is the trolley itself, and the trolley and its impact on the economic success or lack thereof of the loop from the east to west. And it has not only did and I'm just surprised by the trolley is already a memory, and the trolley is so fresh in my mind, at least in terms of its disruption during construction, and then its very troubled existence and what its future might be. So I just find it's interesting to take the trolley, the memory of the trolley, which I guess is a memory, but maybe not, it might have a life. But it did a lot to impact the economic viability. There are a lot of empty storefronts. Even before the plywood went on, there are a lot of empty storefronts, especially at the West Loop. And the economics of, I don't know, I guess I'm just adding up more complexity to what you could have already done in a week, of the notion that there are even more issues in this than maybe you've been able to deal with in terms of transit and impact on connectivity, retail success or not, and the loop is a difficult retail environment. And what is the role? And it is a thriving, vibrant retail environment by definition. That's what gives it its life. And if there aren't retail activities, functions, or stores, and it's really sad that they're really diminishing. COVID hasn't helped, the protests haven't helped, and the trolley hasn't helped. Mm-hmm. So all of those, when I heard stress, I was thinking that kind of stress, but maybe I missed the stress that you feel. But there's a stress on the environment given the pressures. So anyway, I don't know what to do about that, but it's just another way of thinking about it. And the fact that you zeroed in on the trolley tracks already as a memory, I just found really compelling and interesting, and don't know what to do with it.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm sure Louisa is nearly falling off her chair right now, because Louisa doesn't know yet. We were there when the trolley was constructed, so I only heard in the student presentations that it was having a difficult time to get in operations, and that there's actually no moving trolleys on the loop. So So then I thought the students were very savvy at kind of picking that up, that they could just fill in the holes, and they could solve the problem that people won't be, you know, taking nosedives off their bikes on Del Mar and actually using that space. So, but no, I'm equally shocked. I wasn't aware of that complexity at all. Thanks, Jamie. So, this will be a subject we'll be getting back to as well. Khalid, please prepare your presentation and share your screen, and introduce us also to the members of your group as you start out.
Hello, everyone. So this is group 2, waiting lines. So my group are May, Sebastian, June, and me, Colin. So from the survey assessment, we were able to identify the high stress area and location, overlapping the stress data to stationary activity all the day from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And we found out waiting for food from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. is like a common activity on our intersection. So then we identify some waiting typologies, as well as looking to the parking situation on Del Mar. So looking at 12 p.m., we found out like only 25% of cars parking occupied, while at 1 p.m. we find out 23.7% of cars occupied, which give us more room for moving the parking from side of the street to the different locations. So the question here, what should we do? How could we improve the experience and keep the order for the waiting line? So we identify the waiting on Del Mar. So there are some people waiting for food pickup, others are waiting in car, while others are waiting for ordering food. So we are thinking and brainstorming about design strategies and like limiting the number of parking on both sides of the corridor, and also promote cultural activity with social distancing, use movable and flexible furniture to spread the flow for waiting and walking, combine landscape with furniture to release stress, and also shrink automobile car lane to provide a friendly cycling environment. So looking here for the site plan, so this drawing show the places where people are waiting, and also how new waiting space is transformed, how the sidewalk became wider after using this side parking space for different functions during the day. So we have different typologies. We have like identify 6 different typologies in terms of location. We have corner 17. This is show the case before and after our intervention, and also Starbucks and Fitz's, and also Blueberry Hill and Salt and Smoke. So this section shows the Starbucks waiting area where we believe there are high concentration of people are waiting there, just talking. So we think provided them with like flexible furniture, as well as using the side parking for waiting as well. And here corner 17, and the idea about making a new lane for making a new line for waiting, provided with furniture combined with landscape. This is Fitz's. It has different typology where people order and pick up from different location from the parking, while other people can wait on a side and other people can just cross the street. So this is waiting line at Salt and Smoke in the middle of the intersection. We have Salt and Smoke. The distance between like the walking is not enough. So we thought about using the side parking to support the dining outside, as well as providing some places for people to stay and enjoying the shade while they are waiting. So in this drawing, we can show the new way of like design furniture for Starbucks where people are waiting. So some people can sit, others can stand while they are drinking their coffee, and also other people can enjoy waiting while their order prepared. So this is the square between Salt and Smoke and Fitz's. So we believe this furniture, as we observed, there's some people are sitting on the ground and they don't have enough furniture just by waiting for their order. And we also find out like cultural activity has an influence on people. So we thought about how can we provide some spaces for people to wait and also as well as enjoying the show. So in the future, what will happen when everything returns to normal? What should we do to face more unknown challenges? So we believe like Dolomar can be more resilient through the flexibility of layouting and quick changes. And also we learned like how tactical urbanism and design interventions can make larger impacts with like a cost-effective solutions and have a bigger impacts on people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Khalid. So returns to normal, that's for many people a question whether things will ever return to a normal or what that may be. But please, I'll invite the panelists to ask questions for clarification and challenge us.
Can I just ask one clarifying question? The waiting is in particular waiting to pick up food. Is that the waiting? You place an order and you're waiting before you pick up your coffee or your food.
Yeah.
I think waiting was one of the challenges the students were given was to observe the types of lingering activity that they can register in public space. We wanted to know, is public space now reduced just for people to shuffle from A to B? Or do people still dwell in public space? And this group in particular zoomed in on the fact that there were some new lingering activities that at least we weren't consciously aware. Before the pandemic, we didn't really think of waiting space or organizing clusters of people waiting at an interface. So it's a phenomenon that they've unearthed here and wanted to explore.
And all I would say to that is you could, I mean, not to be too, I don't know, poetic or whatever, but you could expand the waiting to the slide you have on the screen now. Like, are we waiting for things to return to normal? In other words, if you have this theme of the daily momentary challenge of waiting to pick up your coffee, but you delve deeper into, well, what are we waiting for? There's a lot of waiting going on.
Yeah.
Society today about health and racism and etc. I mean, there's a lot of things that we're waiting to solve, and not only waiting for our coffee, we're waiting, and what's the role of this public realm in that experience of waiting?
Yeah, that's a great look at it, and I think that's great perspective, because very much so, yes, I think that's this question about what is normal, and are most of us returning to some kind of normal, or well, yeah, we are waiting for something. We are hoping that some of the qualities that public life had before the pandemic will also characterize public life in the future. So that was one of the central aspects of our discussions and our thinking.
Oliver, can I add a bit as well?
Sure.
Because I think what's really positive with now the two presentations that we've seen is that both groups are trying to invite people back into the street and in a meaningful way. And if you wanted to sort of take the big and fear everything, the negative would be that we would all just abandon public space out of fear for whether it's one thing or another. And I think that's the really positive takeaway here, that we do still have a belief that there is an inherent need for public space so that we can still meet and interact and socialize. And that you're looking at this street that, although it has been a commercial corridor, it has not invited a lot of lingering, I would say. It has been a lot of transit, actually, moving back and forth, and not a lot of invitation to stop and interact. And I like that what we've seen now, you're actually looking at whether we can try to invite people to interact even more. And I think what we've seen from this whole situation that we're in is that there is a need for the public space, and especially the street being this democratic space that does not exclude anyone. The ideal situation is that everyone is welcome and that everyone can actually interact and have a say and have a place in the street. And I think that's something that I'm hoping the takeaway. I don't think there is again, the discussion of what is normal. I don't think there's a return to where we were. I'm hoping it moves us forward, that we in a different way appreciate public realm, and that we see our streets as this amazing meeting place. And I think even furthermore, what we've realized is, and I think that's pointing back to us as urban designers, is that we can't, again, it hammers down that we can't take for granted that we know our audience, that we know what they are looking for in public space. We need to engage, and we need to reach out to get those insights, because if we only see it from our own perspective, it's going to be very narrow, and there can be numerous different reasons why people won't feel welcome or invited into public space. And I think that's one, for me, that's just, again, proving that it is so important to actively engage with your community as we do urban design, but also seeing the value of having this meeting place where everyone is welcome. So again, be careful that we're not just commercializing everything. I think we look at things in periods of time, and there was a time where, oh, public space, let's do cafes so everyone can buy their coffee and sit down. But I think we're now, of course, learning that can't be the answer. How do we actually invite? And I love Jenny's comment of the 8 to 80. I think that to have our streets be more inclusive, I think, is a challenge as well. So just to sum that up, I like that both projects are actually providing more invitations for people to linger and to meet and to hang out, even though it might be at a greater social distance, but still a sort of a core belief that public realm and public spaces are still essential to us as human beings.
I think that's super input, Louise. And I think for me, very important is that all four groups think about the phenomenon. So waiting, we learn, is a phenomenon now, but as Jamie points out, we're all waiting. So you're all waiting until you can finish your education and get a job. We're all waiting for the next project. We're all waiting. Yeah, it's a modern condition. And
we're all waiting and not waiting at the same time, right? So, we can't always all be waiting. Just to add to that thought, there's some comments going on over in the chat, which I think are really interesting. And this idea that waiting is passive, I think, is a really important observation. Mm-hmm. How do we, and this comes up a couple of times, how are we planning for the future that we want? Right? We are proactive as designers. So one question I would ask about this project is, how is the waiting activated? And maybe I missed this, but is the project flexible and adaptable so that this waiting moment looks a certain way, but in a week it looks a different way, and in a week it looks a different way, and in a week it looks a different way? Because the moment we find ourselves in, the one thing we can say for sure about it is the present is constantly different, right? The minute by minute, we are in a transitional period, unlike we haven't seen in, generations, for these two massive things to be colliding. So we're not really waiting. I mean, we're being barraged with changes.
Yeah.
So my interest in your project is, okay, this is one moment. How are you prepared for the next moment and the next moment and the next moment? Is it adaptable? And are you planning how that adaptation happens? And I'm looking at these things thinking, well, maybe they roll. Like maybe they actually are interactive and engaging. So right now they're 6 feet apart, but you know, sometimes they're 2 feet apart and sometimes they stack up. Like, tell us, how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, actually, I mentioned in the strategies, the idea about like flexible and adaptable furniture. So all the furniture we are proposing here is kind of changeable per day. So you can move the things, like for example, you can use the side parking for like the lunch and dinner time, and then you can use it as something different in like as a maybe cultural activity spot. And also the furniture and the waiting areas can be changed as well through the day or through the week as well. So
I think that's, Khalid, I think, thanks for answering. I think that would be a dimension to explore further, Linda. Fair comment. And, you know, I was excited that they identified the phenomenon, attached it to some places that they're familiar with, but that would be another great way to spend another week, how this becomes a modular system that can actually, is transformation in itself. I would like to shepherd us on to the next group. All 4 groups should get the benefit of these great opinions. So I will now invite Joe Müller to present Urban Tapestry, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joe, and my group was Dongyang, Haihan, and Yishuan. And our project looks at urban tapestry and looking at how like tapestry is interwoven and has multiple layers that we can provide that within the urban environment of Del Mar. So as we've been saying, the project has been on Del Mar in between Skinker Boulevard and Big Bend Boulevard this past week. And through this axonometric, we can see how the different forms are changing throughout the street from civil buildings on the left-hand side all the way up to really commercial buildings and some residential on the right-hand side. And as we started this process on the first day, a group of students walked Del Mar and monitored their stress levels as they saw it, and eventually overlaid all that information. And using that, we identified 3 areas where we felt that the stress levels were a pretty high number. And then on Wednesday, we did the public life survey. And one of the things was the stationary activity on Del Mar. And throughout the day, from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m., we noticed that 577 people in some capacity were waiting, whether that be for their food, if they were just standing, if they were part of the food service, or delivery. And again, we marked specific areas where we felt that it was very congested throughout the day. And Starbucks, for example, throughout the day had 79 people total. So the 13% of everyone in these 10-minute increments stayed there. And these 3 spots make up almost a third of the whole demographic. And so we looked at how the highest stress levels are also the highest activity levels of people standing around. But then we also looked back out at the vehicle traffic through Del Mar, since it is a prominent vehicular street. And throughout the day, in the 10-minute increments, we charted more than almost 4,000 cars. So calculated for a full hour, it's over 24,000 cars for the whole day. Yet with looking at the numbers of amount of parked cars at the peak time, only 25% of the lots were filled. And again, a lot of those spots were near where the highest activities and the highest stress levels were. So we thought, what do we do? How can we calm areas that are very stressful while also activating underutilized spaces, whether that be parking lots, in between buildings, or public space? And so we looked at a public space network, which utilizes graffiti and art to really weave together these forgotten spaces in a way, while also using infrastructure within the public space that's temporal and can be changed through season, through year, or however they see the needs. So looking at a garden in a space that was pretty constructed, a traffic light corner where you have the 6-foot increments out, and also the shade provides 6-foot increments, so you're able to see that on the ground visualized, but it also adds a new element of decorating the street. A slide or a place for children to play, which Del Mar is lacking greatly. A graffiti open gallery, which again marks everything throughout the street, while also providing a small barrier of 6 feet so you're able to see. A chessboard playground, so using the space between the two buildings to cover and have people sit down and eat, while also being a fun element. Floriculture corner, looking at culture or floral amenities. Another corner by Mission Taco, in between the lofts and shading everything. Really integrating the Chuck Berry statue to provide shade and activities for children to play, and the retirement community next door to come and really be within the space. Another collage and another one. And then another space for seating that's open to the public rather than the culture. And then on top of activating those public spaces, we're looking at how, at least on the commercial side, the whole change with that. And so before, the sidewalk was very condensed and you were still able to see the people that were eating, and then the entrance space, and then the interior. So you had these layers throughout. And for a lot, that was very stressful, walking by people that were eating and in a very tight and narrow corner. So we were looking at moving the eating space out to the parking, especially since only 25% of the parking was used, and the parts that were used, if they're next to a commercial place, could easily be relocated throughout the district since there is ample amount of parking. And again, we identified 3 areas, and looking at how this raised platform can really move the people eating away from the sidewalk and provide a really nice and accessible space that is semi-public, semi-private, but is also safer during the pandemic. And this space could be temporal too, where in St. Louis, since it's a very hot summer and you need a lot of shade, to create a temporary structure to provide that shading. But then when the winter comes and the snow and the frigidness, it's able to be deconstructed since not a lot of people will be eating outside, and that space could be returned to something else. And moving forward, we were thinking about how this opportunity allows Del Mar to really potentially activate itself after COVID with these areas where people could linger throughout and really enjoy the space rather than just being transit through the entire space. And so that is our presentation.
Thank you very much, Joe. I'm just looking at the watch and we've got a quarter of an hour left. So I am actually thinking that we go straight for presentation number 4 and that we then gather final comments and questions after the 4th presentation. So they definitely also get a chance to present to our dear panel. Yeah, so I would ask, please prepare to present Teresa, Lou, Roadside Walk, Work and Play. The stage is yours.
Hi, we are group number 4, and we are Gary Lee, Teresa Liu, Ye Liu, and Etienne Zhang. And our project is titled Street Side Walk, Work, and Play. So from the survey we did, we extracted first the stress assessment, as many other groups did, and we specifically looked at a few spots that were most stressful for most people that are more activated during the daytime. So which is the 3 spots you see on the map. And the programs there are the restaurant Salt and Smoke, United Provision, which is a grocery store, and Blick Art Materials. And then we look at the parking space along Delmar, both on the street side and behind the buildings, the larger lots. And even at the peak time, which is showing here, it's only 25% occupied. So we started thinking how these vacant parking spaces can be utilized to provide better public space. And when we think back at, or even during now at the quarantine time experience in St. Louis, a lot of the activities were done indoors. So people work indoors, some even exercise indoors because the sidewalks might not be able to provide wide enough space for runners. And you can't really take your laptop out to work outdoors because the lack of power source or infrastructures. So we look at the Delmar as it is now, and then we are proposing to condense all the parking spaces into the lots behind the main street and free up all the spaces on the street side for pedestrian use and for other activities to linger, to stay, to play, and to work. And the circles you see here are 3-minute walking radius. So it ensures by condensing these parking lots, it's still pedestrian accessible for people to park and then walk to anywhere on the loop. So we proposed this new, more condensed street for vehicles and wider areas for pedestrian and for other activities. And we listed out our program by thinking what we do at home that can be taken out to the outdoors on a daily basis, even after the pandemic. So we thought about work and using furnitures, and exercise using wider lanes and safer lanes, and children's play area in pockets of streets, and dining and shopping on the outdoor spaces. So the first program insertion is outside of Salt and Smoke. It will be the outdoor seating of the existing restaurant. Oh, sorry, let me go back to the last slide. So in the diagram here, shown here, we looked at Delmar
from the both sides, we propose two strategies. On the south side, we divide the lanes into walking, running, cycling, and then the cars. So it's sorted by the speed of the activity. And on the other side is more just for pedestrian and for other activities. So the restaurant, because of the wider space on the sidewalks proposed, now they have wider space for seating and still have enough width for people to walk by the seating and not having to worry about social distancing. And so here is a collage for that program. And next is the marketplace, which we proposed outside of United Provisions. And this is the main grocery store on the Loop, where a lot of residents and students go to. So we were thinking by bringing the marketplace outdoors, it can encourage the business to interact with pedestrians even after the quarantine time. These outdoor markets can be a really friendly way for the neighborhood to connect. And this one is the pedestrian plaza next to the Blick Material Art Supply shop. And we are proposing to block out this lane next to the store to become a patio space that's extended out from the store itself, and create this patio for people to work and for kids to safely play in the pocket. And with the furnitures on the patio, and we're thinking of running the possibility of running maybe utilities or other infrastructures under the patio space, it creates a nice like stop, pausing space for people to sit down. And so this view is on looking towards the west of Delmar, and the pocket space is to your left. And the last is showing the south side of Delmar. And so these will be the lanes that are sorted by speed. From closest to the storefront is the walking part of the sidewalk to a safe running lane for runners, and then to biking. And so it allowed, by condensing the width of the driving lane, we are thinking it will slow down the traffic, main traffic on Delmar, and make the street more of a balanced use between all the pedestrians on foot, on bike, and through driving. So that is the end of our project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa. This was a great presentation. Teresa, so that concludes our fourth and last student presentation. Our group of 18 was split across the 4 groups. So please ask questions, come with comments before we ask a $1 million question. Who has a question? Otherwise, I will ask one.
I've been thinking about the question on the final, one of the final slides on the last presentation that said something to the effect of returning to normal. And I think it came up with some of the other panelists that is what does that mean? Do we really want to return to what things were like before? I mean, in some ways, sure, but normal 6 months ago, you know, people are being shot in the street. People are being murdered while arrested. Women don't feel safe walking across the street waiting. Like, who can wait? Like 6 months ago, who was allowed to wait on Delmar? Some of us, most of this panel is probably allowed to sit and wait, you know, but not everyone. So thinking about that question and thinking about this crop of students that's about to graduate, and, you know, as master's in urban design, I guess I asked that question of, are these designs about returning to something like that wasn't good? You know, what is life going to be like post-pandemic? Like we are facing pandemics. You know, it used to be every 100 years. Now they're every 4 years. So there is no, there is no good normal in the past that that would be my opinion, is that there is no good normal. This is the future. And so where I get really excited, in some of these presentations are you guys taking, thinking of infrastructure and thinking that, this is the future. Like this slide we're looking at now, this is starting to be bold. There is no parking. It's clear. It's the beginning of something new. Like I never want to go back to the old Del Mar after seeing, these renderings and the renderings. Every group had something really exciting, and I don't want to go walk by Del Mar and not see this anymore. Like this is the future. I don't want normal. I want this.
And can I add to that, because I think there's also a sort of a wonderful theme going through all 4 projects that is, Irina, you mentioned it also, but this reclaiming our public space, that it's not for private commuting, but it's actually something where we can put in measures that invites everyone. And I think I would encourage you all to also think about that some of your designs are quite commercially focused, but also could you see a future where the commercial is maybe not the most dominant element, but you actually have this layer of, this is where I can go and sit down without having to spend money, because some of us can and some can't. So adding, taking away private mobility options, narrowing them down and reclaiming and giving space back to everyone. You don't have to come with a certain X, Y, and Z to be here. And I think that's, again, it's back to the beauty of streets. And I think all 4 projects have captured that in different ways. So I really like the theme, and I think there is an optimism which I really like, that we all seem to believe that we can still see the future for public space, that we don't want to be driven into something where we're so scared that we would abandon public space. I think that's our challenge, that we need to take this on and make sure we are now changing our public spaces into something that is safe for everyone and relevant for everyone, and is this democratic space that I think we realize we need now more than ever. So I think
there is such promise in public space. Like I'd say public space is one of the unsung heroes of this current, I was going to say apocalypse, but we have healthcare workers are essential, and they're the heroes. So many essential workers, grocery store attendants, we have all of these heroes. And public space, it's not dead. It is dead in places that were not diverse, like the Del Mar Loop. It's a commercial strip, so something happened, a pandemic happened, not enough diversity of function in a space like Del Mar. Terrible, but our parks were so successful during the pandemic that they had to close them off to vehicular traffic because they were thwarting efforts to keep people safe and healthy. We're now realizing parks are essential. Public space is essential. It just has to be as resilient as everything else.
I think I'd like to ask, so with all the problems that the United States, cities in the US have right now, but you do have pretty heterogeneous societies, more so than Scandinavia does. So there could be reason for optimism that there could be a future where there is no normal, that there is many individual normals, and that there is coexistence in public space that is possible and can be organized and can be equitable, allowing for different lives. And I think that we would like to think that is built into your DNA somewhere, or at least in the future it could be. more so than in very homogeneous societies like ours pretty much still is. So you do have something. There is something, I think, to successful American cities that I think could be the foundation of something that you can build on. And public space could be one of the levers to create that platform.
I want to support that. Though I think, yeah, Scandinavia is an interesting bar for not heterogeneity, because I think, yeah, you know, we're definitely more heterogeneous than Scandinavia. But I want to go back to what Irene said about waiting, and I want to pair it with the other term, which is loitering, right? So what some people are doing is waiting, and what other people are doing is called loitering. And I think there's that idea that there are structural differences built into this context of publicness is so important to recognize. And that the images, nice as they are for us to reclaim public space for recreation, recreation is not the same thing as democratization. And I think it's really critical to note that difference and to say we don't just want to presume that our vision of public space is going to provide a democratic and heterogeneous public space for everyone. And I get that this process would be much more complex and we would do much more engagement given the, you know, a longer time period. But because our job is to ask the hard questions about the future right now, we have to ask those questions, whether we can solve them in 4 days or not. You know, we know we can't. We know we haven't been able to solve them in generations, but our job is to ask these hard questions. So the other thing I want to think about, the other term, the pair term for, is stressors, right? And we had a little bit of a conversation around stress for who, but I also want to pair that with discomfort. And discomfort is a part of publicness. Discomfort is not something you should necessarily avoid. Heterogeneity often brings discomfort, and there is value in that, right? It makes us examine who we are, what our biases and prejudices are, and why we're in a moment of discomfort. We have to face that discomfort as part of our evolution. And that's also about not returning to the normal, right? If we claim that there is a normal, that is blind, right? That is a blindness to the everything in the world that's not normal for everyone else. So I love the idea of finding stresses as opportunities, not necessarily to reduce the stress, but to examine our opportunity to confront our discomforts and to provide real space for those discomforts to play out. That is real publicness. So I commend you guys for going through this process, and I hope you will question the depth of things you can learn from it. And that goes along with the comment about, you know, commercialization. I think recreation is the other side of that, right? For who? For everyone, with everyone. And that's kind of the bigger goal.
That's a great, yeah.
No, but just building on that, because I think we often come back to this thing that someone would see it as an issue. You have a bench and you have a person sleeping on that bench, and you can go in two directions. You remove the bench, problem gone. But really where we need to go is then you add 4 more benches, and that might give you 5 people sleeping, but then you add 10 more benches. I think it's really this keep believing that our public realm has a role and extend as many invitations as you can, because then at some point, you know, if you have 10 benches and 2 people sleeping, it won't be an issue. But if you only have 1 bench and 1 person sleeping, yeah, it's hard to sit on that bench. And I think it's kind of building a bit on what Linda said, but really understanding what's a democratic space and this recreation for who, and who are we inviting? And it's a huge challenge. I think there's also, and we also realize, of course, there's a limit to what we as urban designers and landscape architects and planners can do. It has to go hand in hand with bigger thinking, but it's an interesting time where we're at. And if nothing else, then what's happening now is really pushing us to question these things and what we've been doing so far. Are we moving in the right direction, or do we need to adjust, and do we need to become more clever and reflect more on what we're doing as professionals also. I think that's really crucial.
I would love to chip in on that as well, but I would say that we're entering the last couple of minutes of this conversation, and I think it's a super dialogue. And Linda, thank you so much. I'd love to have another conversation about what are the kinds of things you can do to take us out of our bliss, so we get one in front of the head and we actually do question ourselves and the things around us, and then become more at ease with a more complex world. I would love to learn more about that. But I think I would like to ask one final question and then invite more comments, panelists, students, anybody who wants. Sort of over the last few months, through my head has been going, what is this going to do long term? Before we had the pandemic and before we had unrest in streets or demonstration in streets, we were sort of pretty much all aligned that the future we have to build on our planet, if we are to build a sustainable world, are more compact, more dense cities, more people living closer together, getting on better with one another and being closer. And I would just like to know, have we damaged that? Can we still do that? Or are we going on a trajectory where we're building different kind of cities that don't get us closer together? So that's a question I'd like to ask if anybody's got any thoughts on. Students, you've all been thinking about this for 5 days, haven't you? Maybe the students need to switch on their videos so we make sure they're not asleep.
Asleep on one of those 10 benches outside that we're gonna have now on Del Mar.
I mean, I'll throw an idea out, which is the thing that's happened that's phenomenal is how fast things changed. You know, urban design is so slow because it's so big, right? And because space is, you know, we have to go through all these approvals and red tape and all this process. But all of a sudden what we saw was the ability to change rapidly. Mm-hmm. You know, the ability to take on a challenge, and cities all over the US closed off streets in ways that they wouldn't have been able to do in any other way, you know, and things happened so fast that to me, that is positive. Yeah. And it means that we can do things that we didn't think we could do, right? We can work the system in ways we didn't think we could work the system. And so the 6 feet thing, you know, somebody from the CDC is going to look back and be like, oh, that was kind of arbitrary when I came up with that 6 foot thing, you know, or there's going to be studies of what we've just done to accommodate this, and some of it's going to be good and some of it's not going to be good. But I think this value, one of the values right now, is our rapid pivot and the ability to come together to make very difficult decisions on very big ideas very quickly. And some of those have been amazing. Like, one of the things that's happened in Los Angeles is they said, okay, while the streets closed down, let's do all the transit construction, you know, or let's repave all the bike lanes, you know? So I don't think we're moving towards a moment of like long-term isolation. I think we are gonna capitalize on our ability to collaborate and to pivot quickly. And we're going to be able to recall this moment as a time where we can prove that it's possible to do that.
Thank you, Linda. That's a great.
I also think we're realizing like we desperately need interaction with other people. I think we're realizing that density and public space are even more important than we realized in the past, because, you know, we were around so many people just in not very constructive and community building ways. I think, like I said, I think public parks are critically important. We're just realizing we don't have enough of them. They're most certainly not distributed equitably across the city. So certain people have access to these spaces and others don't. Very optimistic about the role of urban designers and landscape architects in the future, because we're we are the architects of all of this space that was being designed poorly, that was not for pedestrians, that was not for people of color, that was not for women, that was not for, you know, anyone who wasn't spending money. Like, we're seeing the problems when we can't spend money on, you know, when we can't go into stores, these entire districts are rendered useless, you know?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think, and I don't know if that's mirrored to the US, but just looking more internally, I think at least here, we've definitely also seen the value of sense of community and really starting to value the place that you live and the place where you sort of navigate, and everything has, where we've been very global, I think we've also zoomed in a bit and actually started to talk to our neighbors and supporting your local groceries, and sort of, I think here, a very strong sense of community. And I think that's something very positive also to build on, that you get this sense of belonging, and you want to take pride in your community. You want to invest, you want to get invested, and you want to see your own community thriving. I think that's really something that I think a small step back from that global. I think here we've definitely seen a drop in people shopping in the big global markets and basically going to the corner and say, I'm going to support this guy and that guy, and I'm going to make sure that we're okay. So this very sort of invested, I think is really positive as well, because it also goes back to the public space. And I think, again, we're looking for the public spaces that are, again, close to where we live, the ones that have meaning, the ones that are edged by people we know or people that we get to know, and not maybe the big, very public spaces, but the smaller neighborhood scale. So I think that's an interesting move in that direction as well, that I think is definitely also positive in when you think about the whole rebuilding of community, that's a very good starting point, that you start with that kind of scale. I think that's really, that'll be interesting to see if we can keep that momentum also.
Yeah. We can retain that moment and that dynamic. Thank you. That was 3 really good final statements. Jamie, I don't know if you have a contribution at the very end, if you have a moment, if you want to make a final remark before I summarize. Do you draw anything positive out of the last 3-4 months that you think helps you reshape campus or the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think when again are we going to have cities where there's no commuter traffic? I mean, it's let us play out scenarios and understand what the impact of changing demands on our infrastructure can allow us to do, whether it's closing streets to, I mean, there are no cars on the streets, or there hadn't been, so therefore they can be open. But when will we have that moment? And so just maybe it's been a great example of what can happen when things change. Now, getting things to change other than the way they've happened the last 3 months is the challenge. But I mean, the resiliency and the pivoting have been amazing.
Yeah.
But how do we learn from that and apply it to there are the realities of cities that will come back, that have been somewhat, is in my mind, not the natural functioning and vitality of cities but we've been able to see cities in a different way, somewhat, which has been really informative, but filled with contradictions and filled with conundrums and filled with unresolved systems. I don't know. It's an amazing opportunity. And when we look back, it's hard to do today because we're all sitting in the middle of it. But when we look back and so many lessons to learn out of the last 3 months and the next 3 months and the next however many months on so many levels. It's hard to see those lessons when you're sitting in the middle of it, but there's a lot to learn.
It is, but in a way, it's what Linda was saying. This last 3-4 months has been a smack on the forehead, and it's caused us all to behave in ways that we would have all said is impossible 6 months ago. And now we've done it for 3-4 months. So yes, those pressures will come back, and there's other dynamics at play. But we have, and I think I like that positive aspect that now we have all seen that things can be different. That's a really great start. So we can't just have rounds of people saying that can't be done, that can't be done. So I think that's great. So I would say this is the first time that I've been leading a webinar like this. I've been really bad at drawing in comments from the outside. Mohammed has been trying, he's been showing me responses, but I've been too focused on the panelists and the students. I promise next time, I know there's people in the chat room that are really keen to make comments, but I'm afraid we'll have to wait for the anniversary Lively City Studio next year. And I promise that even though we're no longer under pandemic conditions, on the final day, we're going to do this. We're going to invite a global audience, and we're going to have a dialogue that more people can chip into, even though we might be in St. Louis or another place in Europe or elsewhere in the world. So I would just like everybody really to switch on the screen now. I think we should exit with a big show of hands for all the students, a big thumbs up. Thank you so much for your hard work. And thank you so much for choosing to do this studio. And you are really special because this is a year different from any other. And I hope you're getting some valuable learning out of it. Yeah. So on that note, I would like to thank also in the waiting room, we have Carmen, we have Jonathan Stittelman, we have Derek Höferlin. I've been really bad at introducing everybody, but I will just do a collective thank you at the very end, and hope to see you again next year. And you will all be invited. Everybody that was in this call will be invited next year, and then we'll hopefully be able to look back on this experience. So thank you, everybody, and we'll check out at this point. Have a good evening and a great weekend, and be safe.